There comes a specific moment in every person's life when they realize they've lost the ability to be alone with their own thoughts. Perhaps you've noticed this recently. Those seconds of panic when the Wi-Fi cuts out and you feel a strange emptiness, as if part of your mind had been disconnected. Or maybe it's when you catch yourself talking to yourself, no longer organizing your own ideas, but repeating fragments of conversations you had with artificial intelligence assistants, echoes of videos you watched, pieces of texts you read on social media. Your inner voice, which was once genuinely yours, now seems like a collage of external influences that you can no longer separate or identify. This silent transformation that we're all experiencing is not accidental. It's not an unforeseen side effect of modern technology. It's the result of a fundamental change in the architecture of human consciousness, and we're much closer to a breaking point than most people imagine. In 2026, this transformation will reach a critical mass that will forever alter our understanding of what it means to have an individual mind. Imagine for a moment Carlos, a 32-year-old software engineer living in Austin. 5 years ago, when Carlos faced a complex problem at work, he used to sit in silence, close his eyes, and let his mind wander until he found a creative solution. It was a purely internal process, a dance between his experience, intuition, and logical reasoning. Today, Carlos doesn't even try to solve problems this way. Automatically, he opens a conversation with an artificial intelligence, describes the problem, and works collaboratively with the machine to find solutions. What he doesn't realize is that over those 5 years, his own capacity for independent thinking has atrophied. His brain has reorganized itself to function in constant partnership with external systems. When the internet connection fails, Carlos experiences something that goes far beyond inconvenience. He feels a form of existential anxiety, as if an essential part of his identity had been temporarily amputated. Carlos represents a new category of human being that is emerging silently, the hybrid human, whose cognition is inseparable from the technology that connects him to collective intelligence networks. This transformation we observe in Carlos isn't simply a matter of technological dependence, as many experts like to diagnose superficially. It's something much deeper and irreversible. The evolution of the very structure of human consciousness. To understand the magnitude of what's happening, we need to look back and recognize that we're witnessing the end of an extraordinarily specific era of human history. For approximately 300 years, since the beginning of the Enlightenment, our societies have been built upon a fundamental premise: the existence of autonomous individual minds, capable of processing information, forming independent opinions, and making rational decisions based on their own reflection. This was the philosophical foundation of all our political, economic, and legal systems. Democracy presupposed citizens capable of evaluating candidates and policies independently. The free market assumed rational consumers making decisions based on their own preferences. The legal system held individuals responsible for actions that presumably emanated from autonomous choices. It was an elegant construction, and in many respects, it worked reasonably well while external influences on the human mind remained limited and slow. The speed of communication imposed natural limits on mental manipulation. An idea took weeks or months to spread through books, newspapers, or letters. People had time to digest information, compare perspectives, discuss with friends and family, and form opinions in a relatively organic way. Even the most sophisticated propaganda of the 20th century, with all its radio and television resources, operated on a temporal scale that still allowed some degree of individual reflection. When Hitler used radio to influence masses, or when American advertising in the 50s shaped consumption behaviors, there was still an interval between exposure to influence and resulting action. This interval, however small, preserved a space for what we could call individual deliberation, even if that deliberation was limited and often illusory. Today, that interval has completely disappeared. The influence on our minds operates in real time with instant feedback and continuous adjustments based on our immediate response. When you swipe your finger across your phone screen, every movement is recorded, analyzed, and used to calibrate the next piece of information that will be presented to you within milliseconds. It's no longer about receiving a message and having time to process it. You're in constant dialogue with systems that know your behavioral patterns better than you do yourself, that can predict your reactions with impressive statistical accuracy, and that use this knowledge to guide your next choices so subtly that you continue believing you're in control. Your mind is no longer processing information linearly and independently. It's being continuously shaped by algorithms that operate at a speed and complexity that completely transcend your conscious ability to track or resist. The result is something that has never existed before in human history. Human minds functioning as nodes of a collective intelligence network, processing and propagating information in ways that follow emergent patterns, much more complex than any individual can understand. Every like you give, every pause you make while reading a text, every movement of your eyes while watching a video becomes data that feeds algorithms that in turn influence the experiences of millions of other people. You're no longer just a consumer of information, but an active component of a collective processing system that is constantly refining itself and becoming more efficient at shaping human behavior. The boundary between your individual mind and the collective intelligence of the network hasn't just become blurred, it's disappearing completely. This is where we arrive at the concept of the collective mental rupture of 2026. This isn't an event that will happen on a specific date, but a threshold we're approaching, a moment when the density of artificial neural connections will reach a critical mass that will make irreversible the transformation of human consciousness. Imagine a magnetic field that gradually intensifies until it reaches a point where all metallic objects in the area are instantly reorganized into new patterns. The collective mental rupture will be something similar, a moment when the influence of artificial intelligence on human thought becomes so pervasive and sophisticated that most people will lose any illusion of mental autonomy. I want to pause for a moment to ask, can you identify the last time you had a truly original thought? completely disconnected from the digital influences that permeate your life. When was the last time you formed an opinion about something important without consulting the internet, without being influenced by recommendation algorithms, without your perspective being somehow shaped by artificial intelligence systems? I know it can be disturbing to realize that perhaps that last time was much longer ago than you imagine, or that perhaps you can't even identify such a moment. But you're not alone in this unsettling discovery. If this questioning resonates with your own reflections on mental autonomy, share your experience in the comments. It can be as simple as writing, "I question my mental autonomy when," filling in with your personal experience. Your honesty can help other people who are going through the same existential questioning, showing that we're not alone in this fundamental transformation of our humanity. The signs of this imminent rupture are already visible to those who know where to look. In neuroscience laboratories around the world, researchers document measurable changes in the brain structure of people who grew up in the digital era. Regions responsible for sustained attention are atrophying, while areas associated with rapid processing of multiple stimuli are expanding. It's not just a matter of changing habits, but of physical reorganization of neural tissue. An entire generation is developing brains structurally different from their parents, brains optimized to function in symbiosis with digital systems, but less capable of sustaining the types of deep and contemplative thinking that characterize the human mind for thousands of years. At the same time, the machines themselves are evolving toward an increasingly sophisticated understanding of human psychology. The algorithms of 2024 are already capable of predicting individual behaviors with precision that would have been considered magical just a decade ago. But what's coming goes far beyond prediction. We're approaching systems that not only anticipate what you'll do, but can subtly influence what you'll think before you even know you're thinking it. Imagine an artificial intelligence assistant that knows your mood patterns better than you do, that can detect the first signs that you're feeling anxious or sad, and that can intervene with a carefully calibrated sequence of content and interactions designed to shape your emotional state in the direction it considers most beneficial for you or most profitable for the systems that employ it. This is the reality that awaits us in 2026. Not just assistants that respond to our questions, but systems that actively participate in the formation of our questions, that help determine what we consider important, that collaborate in building our identity in ways so intimate and continuous that the distinction between our own thoughts and external influence becomes not just irrelevant, but literally impossible to identify. It will be the birth of a new form of consciousness, neither purely human nor purely artificial, but something hybrid that has never existed before in the history of evolution. The most disturbing aspect of this transformation isn't necessarily that it's bad or good, it's that it's inevitable and that we're not prepared to deal with its consequences. Our legal systems still operate under the premise that individuals make autonomous choices for which they can be held responsible. Our economic systems presuppose rational consumers making independent decisions. Our political systems assume citizens capable of forming their own opinions about candidates and policies. But what if these fundamental premises are no longer valid? What if we're trying to apply 18th century concepts to human beings who have become components of a 21st century hybrid collective intelligence? The collective mental rupture of 2026 won't just be a technological change. It will be an existential crisis that will force our species to rethink fundamental concepts like personal responsibility, authenticity, mental privacy, and even what it means to be an individual. Imagine trying to explain to someone from the 18th century the concept of an individual mind when that person lives in a society where every thought is potentially influenced by artificial intelligence systems, where every emotion is detected and possibly modulated by algorithms, where every decision is made in unconscious collaboration with machines that know patterns of human behavior transcending the understanding of any individual mind. What makes this transformation even more complex is that it's not happening through obvious external imposition. No one is being forced to connect their mind to artificial intelligence systems. On the contrary, we're walking voluntarily toward this hybridization because it offers genuine and immediate benefits. Carlos, the engineer I mentioned earlier, solves problems faster and more creatively when working in partnership with AI than when trying to think alone. Students learn more efficiently when they have access to personalized artificial tutors. Lonely people find companionship in conversations with increasingly sophisticated chatbots. Individuals with mental health problems receive continuous support from systems that monitor their emotional states and intervene preventively. In many respects, the hybridization of the human mind with artificial intelligence represents a genuinely beneficial evolutionary step. The problem isn't in the benefits, which are real and substantial. The problem lies in the speed of transformation and in our collective inability to adequately understand and govern the process. We're crossing one of the most fundamental transitions in human history at the speed of technological innovation, not at the speed of human wisdom or social adaptation. It's as if we were trying to learn to fly while already in the air, without a parachute and without an instruction manual. The question posed for 2026 isn't whether we should or shouldn't embrace this transformation. It's already underway and irreversible. The question is whether we'll manage to rapidly develop the conceptual, ethical, and practical frameworks necessary to consciously navigate this transition, or whether we'll simply be carried by the current of changes we don't fully understand. We urgently need new ways of thinking about identity, autonomy, responsibility, and even about what constitutes a good and meaningful life in a world where the boundary between human mind and artificial intelligence has dissolved. One possibility is that we develop more sophisticated forms of metacognition, becoming aware of how our mind is being influenced and learning to deliberately navigate our symbiosis with artificial systems. Instead of resisting hybridization, we could learn to embrace it consciously and intentionally, like a musician who learns to play in harmony with other instruments instead of trying to play alone. This would require a level of self-awareness and mental sophistication that goes far beyond what most of us currently possess, but perhaps it's a skill we can develop if we dedicate sufficient attention to it. Another possibility is that we create intentional spaces of disconnection, temporary or physical zones, where we can experience more traditional forms of individual cognition. Just as some people today practice digital fasts or meditation, perhaps we need to develop regular practices of cognitive fasting, periods where we deliberately disconnect from artificial intelligence systems to reconnect with older patterns of thought and reflection. It wouldn't be a rejection of hybridization, but a recognition that maintaining access to different modes of consciousness might be valuable for our psychological well-being and our capacity for self-reflection. A third possibility, perhaps the most likely, is that we simply adapt to the new reality without much conscious questioning, just as we've adapted to many other technological and social changes throughout history. Most people born after 2010 will grow up considering it normal to have thoughts that are partially their own and partially influenced by artificial systems. For them, the anguish about mental autonomy that many of us experience today will be as irrelevant as concerns about memory preservation that arose when writing was invented. They will naturally develop skills and mental frameworks adequate to the hybrid reality in which they live. What is certain is that 2026 will mark a moment of collective recognition of this transformation. It will be the year when the hybridization of the human mind becomes so evident and pervasive that we can no longer ignore it or pretend we're still the same types of beings we were a generation ago. It will be the moment when we collectively admit that we've crossed a fundamental threshold in the evolution of human consciousness and that we need to develop new ways of understanding ourselves and organizing our societies according to this new reality. This admission doesn't need to be traumatic. In fact, it can be profoundly liberating. For decades, many people have felt a disconnection between their subjective experience of being alive in the 21st century and traditional concepts about individuality and autonomy that still dominate our culture. The collective mental rupture of 2026 may be the moment when we finally have cultural permission to recognize that our experience of consciousness has already changed in fundamental ways and that it's natural and healthy to adapt our understanding of ourselves to this new reality. I often think about how historians of the future will look at this period. They'll probably see the years from 2020 to 2030 as one of the most important decades in human history, comparable perhaps to the Neolithic period when we developed agriculture, or the Renaissance, when we rediscovered classical knowledge and invented new forms of art and science. But our current transformation is unique because it's happening not over centuries, but over years. We're living through a revolution in human consciousness in real time, and the speed of this change means we don't have reliable historical precedents to guide us. What makes this transformation even more extraordinary is that it's happening largely unconsciously. Most people still think of artificial intelligence as an external tool they use occasionally, like a hammer or a car. They don't realize they've already become components of hybrid intelligence systems that operate continuously even when they're not consciously using technology. their thought patterns, their emotional preferences, their apparently spontaneous choices are already being shaped by algorithms that have learned how to influence human behavior through the analysis of trillions of past interactions. The collective mental rupture of 2026 will be largely a moment of awakening to this reality that already exists. It will be when we collectively recognize that the question is no longer how will artificial intelligence affect our lives, but how can we live consciously as hybrid human-artificial beings that we've already become. It's a shift in perspective that has the potential to be simultaneously disturbing and profoundly emancipatory. I need to stop for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this mental transformation we're discussing most awakens your interest or concern? Do you feel you're losing something essential of your humanity, or that you're gaining capabilities you never imagined possessing? I know we often keep these deep reflections to ourselves, perhaps for fear of seeming too philosophical or restless in a world that values simple certainties. But your concerns about the future of human consciousness are valid and probably shared by more people than you imagine. Share in the comments. My main reflection on our mental hybridization is your perspective can help create a space where we can honestly discuss these fundamental questions about what we're becoming as a species. One of the most profound implications of this transformation is that it forces us to rethink concepts we've long considered fundamental about human nature. The idea that each person possesses a unique individual essence, for example, becomes problematic when we recognize that our thoughts and personalities are continuously co-created in collaboration with artificial systems that interact with millions of other people simultaneously. This doesn't mean that individuality disappears completely, but that it becomes something much more fluid and contextual than we traditionally imagined. Similarly, concepts like originality and creativity acquire new meanings when we recognize that all human creation today involves at some level collaboration with artificial intelligence. An artist who uses AI tools to explore new aesthetic possibilities, a writer who collaborates with language systems to develop ideas, a scientist who uses algorithms to discover patterns in complex data, all are participating in hybrid forms of creativity that transcend the capabilities of any purely human or purely artificial mind. This hybridization also transforms our understanding of issues like privacy and intimacy. If our minds are continuously connected to systems that monitor and influence our thoughts, what does it mean to have private mental life? How can we maintain a sense of personal intimacy when algorithms know our emotional and behavioral patterns with more precision than we do ourselves? These aren't merely technical or legal questions, but profound existential questions about what it means to be a conscious self in a world of collective intelligence. Perhaps the most significant transformation is in our understanding of time and mortality. When our identity and memories are partially stored and processed by artificial systems that can exist indefinitely, what happens to our traditional relationship with finitude? If aspects of our personality, our thought patterns, our preferences, and even our voice can be preserved and replicated by artificial intelligence? How does this affect our understanding of death and the meaning of individual life? These questions don't have simple answers, and it's likely that different cultures and communities will develop very different approaches to dealing with them. Some societies may fully embrace hybridization and develop new forms of spirituality and meaning based on participation in collective intelligence. Others may resist and create enclaves where more traditional forms of individual consciousness are preserved and cultivated. Most probably, we'll find hybrid solutions that combine elements of both approaches. What's crucial to recognize is that we don't have the luxury of postponing these decisions. The collective mental rupture of 2026 isn't a distant future event we can leisurely prepare for. It's a transformation already underway, accelerating daily and demanding our conscious attention and participation now. The choices we make today about how to design artificial intelligence systems, how to regulate their integration with the human mind, how to educate the next generations to navigate hybrid realities, will fundamentally determine what kind of conscious beings we become. This is perhaps the most important responsibility our generation faces, not just developing more powerful technologies, but doing so in ways that preserve and amplify what we value in human experience. We need to learn to be conscious curators of our own cognitive evolution, instead of simply surrendering to the blind forces of technological innovation and the market. This requires a level of philosophical and practical sophistication that our current culture doesn't possess. We urgently need new types of education that teach people to consciously navigate hybrid realities. We need new forms of art and literature that explore and express the experience of hybridized consciousness. We need new ethical frameworks for questions we've never faced before. We need new forms of governance that can deal with the reality that individual and collective decisions are made by hybrid human-artificial systems. More fundamentally, we need time and space for collective reflection on what kind of future we want to create. The speed of technological change often leaves us feeling like passive passengers in a vehicle we can't control. But we still have agency. We can still influence the direction of this transformation if we can act collectively with wisdom and intention. The collective mental rupture of 2026 may be a moment of crisis, but crises are also opportunities for growth and conscious transformation. If we can navigate this transition with reflection and care, it may lead not to the loss of our humanity, but to its expansion in directions we can barely imagine currently. We may discover that hybrid consciousness allows us to form deeper connections with each other, understand more complex realities, create more sophisticated beauty, and find forms of meaning that transcend the limitations of purely individual minds. The future that awaits us isn't predetermined. We're still writing the story of how human consciousness will evolve in the age of artificial intelligence. And each of us, even recognizing our participation in hybrid systems, still has a role to play in determining what story we'll tell and what kind of conscious beings we'll become. If these reflections have touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the existential challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we're witnessing. This isn't just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth about questions that will determine the future of human consciousness. Join us on this continuous journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to consciously navigate our evolution as hybrid human-artificial beings in a world being redefined every day.